Stanford University.
I am incredibly happy to be here, and even happier to be able to see you. Is there anyone in the house who is not suffering? Anybody can say, I haven't suffered. I don't know what suffering is. Passed me by. Really? I see some hands up here. Yeah, I think that suffering is the great equalizer. And it is something that comes to us as part of life's journey, which comes sometimes as such a shock because we think that maybe we have avoided it, maybe we have escaped it. And in any case, maybe my suffering is not quite as bad as so-and-so's suffering. For instance, my suffering may not be as bad as the Kennedy family. There's some suffering for you. My suffering may not be as bad as knowing that Martin Luther King's children, you know, they're having a really tough time. And they don't even, well, one of them died, the one that more closely followed her father, but the other children, you can tell that they were deeply, deeply harmed. And what about Che's children? I went to Havana to see Che's children, Che Guevara's children, because it seems very interesting and odd and weird that we don't pay more attention to the children of those who have been assassinated. We just leave them. How can that be? What happens to these children? Their fathers, their mothers, sometimes shot down before their eyes like Medgar Evers' children. And then we forget. Some of you don't know who I'm talking about because this was before you were. But you know, there is the internet. So basically, there's no excuse for not knowing your history. And part of your history is this brutality. You know, this incredibly insensitive murdering and assassinating and horrible behavior. That means that as a society, we can hardly ever hope to be safe. I mean, you know, eventually somebody is going to turn on the pistols in the church. They are. That's what happens. You cannot turn away from all of these children, all these people, all these wives, often, all these husbands, but mostly wives. You know, deep suffering. Malcolm's widow. Malcolm X's widow. If you don't know who Malcolm X was, look him up. But some of us here know, you know. And then the grandson, also named Malcolm, ended up being murdered. And then the wife burned to death. So we have sorrow here. We have reason to have sorrow. And part of the reason we do suffer is that we cut ourselves off from the suffering of other people. You cannot really do that and be well. It's like, just this blanket sorrow is. And even though you temporarily, are feeling warm and you don't need the blanket, or the blanket is not quite on you, eventually it's going to reach over there and cover you. And that is what we are seeing in our very sad country. Did any of us ever expect this country to be such a sad place? Did we? I grew up in the South where every white man was just like Donald Trump. That's what I expected of white men. I mean, it was just like, okay, this is how they are. But what a sad thing, and how happy I was that the first person, white man, that I met who wasn't like that, guess who it was? Excuse me. It was Howard Zinn. As far away from Donald Trump as you could get without falling off the edge of the earth. And that too is part of what we learn, as we go along. In the South there, all those years ago, suffering, people making you get off the sidewalk. I mean, now really. What kind of being would you have to be to force somebody that you could force to get off the sidewalk so that you could walk on it? I mean, who are you? What does that say about you? And then, there are those of us who survived that somehow. But the arrow that goes into the heart, at every instance of injustice, of meanness, of cruelty, stinginess, that's the arrow we have to learn to take out. Because if we don't learn to take out that arrow, it is there, the wound becomes infected. And we become like the people we hate. And what a fate that is. I mean, and really, if you're going to be something not like what it is you don't like. So I'm in mourning for my friend. I'm wearing this squash blossom necklace because I'm in mourning for Dennis Banks. Dennis Banks was a Native American leader of the American Indian movement. And I was thinking about his suffering, the suffering that's one of the roots of our suffering as a society. Born on a reservation, extremely poor, taken away from his mother, put in a boarding school where they beat him every time he tried to speak his own language. Arrow in the heart. He runs away, he tries to get back to his mother. He can never find her. He doesn't find her until basically she's dead, and he goes and somebody gives him a shoebox full of the letters that she wrote to him while he was in the boarding school that they never even bothered to give to him. Arrow in the heart. So at some point, Dennis, Native American, poor boy, no prospects, joins the military, of course, which is what the military is for, to be peopled by our poor children, whether you're white, black, brown, or whatever, poor, nowhere else to go to the military. And being Dennis, this great warrior, after a while he says, to hell with that, I'm just leaving. So he leaves and he goes all the way to Japan. I don't know how he did that. Got married there, had a family, had a child, but of course they found him. Came back, got in prison, and then got out of prison. The elders of his reservation called on him to come and help them because I don't know how much you know about reservations, but you should know everything about them. They're your creation. You should know everything there is to know about reservations. They're so poor often that in the wintertime, people have to send out appeals for oil so they can heat their houses. But anyway, the elders said, come help us. The thugs, the Native American agency people, are just terrorizing the community. Come and help us. So he goes to help. And of course, this is something the FBI doesn't like, Indians, black people helping themselves. He gets there, and before long there's a huge battle, and someone is murdered. He runs away for the next 11 years he's running. So to make a long story fairly short, during the last part of his flight, I was keeping up with him because I believe very strongly that if you don't know what is happening to the indigenous people where you live, you hardly know where you are. You don't know where you are. So anyway, I by then had Lyme disease, which I don't know, how many of you have had Lyme disease? It's a terrible disease. Isn't it rough? Oh, God, talk about suffering. You sit there, you think about, now can I walk from here to there? It can be really bad. But in any case, I had been suffering so deeply that I decided that I just was sick of it and of living that way. You know, I may suffer, but darn if I'm going to suffer on a couch. I'm going to suffer in an airport. So I decided that I would go. They'd caught Dennis by then. He actually turned himself in. And they were going to try him in Custer, South Dakota. Now, this is where Custer, who died for your sins, remember him? So, and everywhere you go there, you know, if they could get away with it, they'd have an Indian scalp hanging on every lamppost, because it's still a very redneck, racist country against indigenous people. And I was so weak that I couldn't even stand, so I sat on the ground and laid on the ground outside the courthouse just to be a witness to this suffering, because the old people had sent for him. They were there literally begging for his life. Somebody tried to explain. We were suffering. They were beating up on us. You know, we asked them to send somebody and come and help us, and Dennis and I forget the other man's name. They came, and then look what happened. And don't kill him, and have mercy on him. Now, Dennis, being a warrior, I want you to know that even in this situation, here we are in this completely racist town in the middle of wherever in South Dakota this was, and he had dressed himself in the full regalia of his people, which means he had on the robe, you know, he had this hair, you know, down to his back and a red ribbon through it, so he was looking great. But he'd also taught himself as a discipline and as a meditation to become a runner. And he started to teach children how to do marathons. So here he comes out to be tried and sent to prison, dressed in all this wonderful Native American stuff. And guess what he's wearing on his feet? Nikes. That's the kind of sense of humor he had, too. So they sentenced him to, I don't know, whatever they sentenced him to. He didn't stay the whole time, which is good. And when he got out, he made it his business to turn his attention to the youth. And every year they did this run from one end of the country to the other to teach the youth endurance, resiliency, stamina, you know, and also to let them see their land. You know, most children on the reservations, you know, just like most people outside the reservation who don't know anything about reservations, they don't know anything about out here. So it was an amazing journey for them to come and see America. You know, they're not from America, they're from somewhere else. I mean, they are, you know. Anyway, so I have been on many journeys with this person. And when I think about suffering, I think about the indigenous people suffering, and I think about Dennis. And one of the things that he tried to do, and this is just so indicative of a certain kind of desperation, he tried to have so many children that he could help repopulate his people. But you know, that's a lot of work. And I have to say, some of the women were not so happy. But it's, you know, it's good for us to think about the people who have been so deeply harmed by our government and by racism and the, you know, inability to basically see other people as human beings with all of the, you know, attributes of humans and just set out to destroy them, to wipe them off the face of the earth, you know. This is kind of like the Palestine of this country. So that kind of suffering. And when he died 10 days ago, I had just seen him, because the other stubborn thing about Dennis was that every 4 years or so, he would run for president or vice president or something, just to show that he could. And he would often run with a Latina sister, Gloria La Riva, and they would get, you know, I don't know, a few votes. But it was clearly not about that. It was about affirming that there are other ways to look at the world and other ways to do things. And I love that about them both, that they were courageous, creative, inventive, and full of life and full of hope for people. And both of them have suffered very deeply. Now, I started, I've written a lot of books, and at some point I realized that, and actually I'm still writing them. I can't help it. I guess it's just something that happens. But I'm going to read you a few things that I've written lately, because I figure that where I am now in my life is more about teaching. It's more about connecting the histories and connecting the peoples and connecting the people's histories so that they know each other. Otherwise, how will you ever know? I mean, if you really live in a country and you are foreign to its roots, you hardly are a tree, you know? You're like, you're just kind of wavering there. You don't have a real connection. You may think you do, but you don't. And I feel this very strongly in this country, because one of the things you will notice as you drive around in it is that the landscape is silent. This landscape that we inhabit here is not supposed to be this quiet. It's supposed to have all kinds of things, you know, bellowing and mooing and lowing and crashing about. It's unnaturally quiet because they have killed the beings that should be here. When we go on a train from you know, New York or wherever, across the country, we should be looking at just millions of buffaloes. I mean, we really should. That is what made the land so alive. And that is part of the reason that the people who were killing the Indians decimated the buffalo. They killed them so the people wouldn't have anything to eat. But also because in themselves they had no spirit with which to grasp what the buffalo was to the land and what life is to the land. So to people who think of land as alive, it is as if, you know, the land has been murdered along with the people. So the land is mute. The land is just there. And that is why you can have, you know, fertilizer that's terrible. You could have Monsanto come, you know, you can have people just think it's just a thing. It's not. And so, this first poem is kind of long, but I think I want to read it because we're all in a place that's really different. You know, I think this year, more even than last year, and last year was pretty rough in terms of climate change and devastation and, of course, political disaster. But this year, we get to see how close we may be, you know, how very close we may be to not being here. And it's a terrible time, but it's a wonderful time to reassess. What is it that we want? Who are we? Who do we want to be? What is worth doing? What is worth being? So here is this poem that I wrote because I'm from up in the north, and the fires were just, very scary and coming closer and closer to where I live. So this is called "And Then There Were the Fires." And I start this off listing some people that some of you may not be very intimate with, but most of these people were assassinated, and this is part of the arrow in the heart. I never experienced October 9th. This is when the fire started. It's also John Lennon's birthday. I never experienced October 9th without giving thanks for John Lennon, someone who had his head on straight. This year was no different. I miss him still. Perhaps he and Medgar Evers, shot down before his children. Viola Liuzzo, the Italian-American who came to help and who was murdered by the KKK. The black women and men with no marker to name them. Lynched people were not marked. They were just thrown away. They didn't have a marker. Bobby, Martin, Jack, Malcolm, who was such a man, and Marilyn Monroe, who was such a mysterious person who wrote herself into this poem, and all the rest of them in their thousands, probably millions. Perhaps they are sitting somewhere comfy in the afterlife. I like to think about the afterlife. Chatting. They are discussing mostly what they could not have understood. That is the biggest sorrow, apparently. I feel it myself. What they could not have understood. What we cannot, without good teaching, understand. What they could not understand. And then there were the fires. Eating up the lovely countryside and cities of Northern California where I live. My friends feared for me. And it is true, I was sick with sorrow, as the flames gobbled up the lives of people I don't know, but hold dear. When wildfires are chasing you from home, what can you grab? What can you grab? When the order comes to vacate now, most folks I know would grab their dog. I give thanks right here that those are the kind of folks I know. There has to be an amazing letting go in the moment. A great clarity must descend. And if not then, when? If not then, when? But this poem is about something else, if it is a poem. It is about why we need art. As I lay mostly contemplating our ongoing disasters, fire, flood, earthquake, pestilence, radiation, absence of ensouled guidance, I turned to artists, those souls who almost gleefully suffer if they believe they're gifted to offer even a glimmering of light or delight, or even distraction. And so I immersed myself in books, 2 of them not even near to publication yet, Looking for Lorraine by Imani Perry, about the fabulous sister writer Lorraine Hansberry, who died of cancer before she could fully hit her stride. And What Matters in the Long Run, a depthful memoir by Jean Shinoda Bolin, who has taught millions of women, their archetypal goddessness. But beyond that and with that, some distress, desolation within myself was nourished by movies. The hurricanes were battering parts of the world I especially love. Floods were devastating places I would have loved to walk. High winds were sending flames briskly toward my home. So I went first to see Chavela, about the great Costa Rican-born but deeply Mexican singer. She is the old woman singing to Frida Kahlo in the perfect movie, Frida. They were lovers, she and the actual Frida, when she was very young and Frida was middle-aged. Having been abandoned by her parents because she seemed to be a boy, we can assume these misfits gave each other a lot. In Chavela, we see some of the struggle to live in this world as who we truly are. We see that nature, in its delight with itself, can create anything, and mostly does, for our enjoyment. It is humans, misshapen by our programming, who cannot bear to hazard a delight not sanctioned by our bosses. There I sat, happy, transfixed, weeping along with Chavela through the years lost to grief, alcohol, too many lovers, her magical gift of song muted by tequila, and then her rebirth. What are wildfires? What are wildfires to the surety that we can rise again? Not as we were, not ever again as we were, because all vanity is burnt out of us. We see our smallness, but also it can be revealed to us that in ways that matter, we are or can be large. We can choose our dog. Next, twice I watched on my tiny MacBook Air, once alone and then with someone who loves me, Our Souls at Night. This film, starring Jane Fonda and Robert Redford, is about two old people who become wise. They find a way to shack up, as we other old people used to say, and find usefulness and joy in the new, incredibly interesting turns of mind of old age. Who has not watched movies made by these two for 100 years? Robert Redford and Paul Newman jumping off a cliff in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The fall would probably kill you. But jump they did, just as in this movie, Redford, whose hair hasn't changed, though all else has. Ah, vanity. Jumps or moves with cautious bravery into Jane Fonda's bed. And Jane, always a self-starter, and born, apparently, to be criticized even while being praised, shows once again that she actually can at least attempt to create her own reality, a great encouragement to the rest of us. So here we are. Exactly where we've been heading for so long. The fire next time is here. Praise and thanks to James Baldwin for thoughtfully, always reminding us, what do we have to comfort us besides great books and great movies? Hopefully, the love of a good woman, whatever your persuasion, so irrelevant in the moment. The adoration or friendship of a good man, the affection and respect of one's children and friends, a sacred bond with our dog. Perhaps we are facing our last turn around the cosmic wheel. Flood, wind, cold, radiation, earthquake, fascism, polar shift, fire, realization. We may have come this time. We may have come this time to say goodbye. So I was thinking about opening this tonight with a song by Whitney Houston, but that didn't appear. But I'm sure most of you know of her music, of her singing. I am very clear about who I work for. I work for the ancestors. I have never worked for anybody else. And Whitney and Michael Jackson, Prince, too many others to name are ancestors now. So I work for them. And one of the things that, the song that I wanted you to hear as you came in is I Will Always Love You. You know that song where she sings like, what? They played it? Yay! Why did I hear it? Oh, I needed to hear it myself. But anyway, well, another time. I love that song, and here's the thing that I want to say about her as an ancestor figure at this point. And we can think about this in terms of her suffering and her arrow in the heart. Because I think it's really important who you sing to and who you sing about, and in fact, it's really important that you create your own song. You can get into a lot of trouble trying to deal with somebody else's song that they wrote for you. Okay? Thank you. So, you know, there's a special which I really recommend lately on Whitney, and it just shows you very clearly that song should never have been sung to her what was he, bodyguard in the movie? Wrong person. I mean, really, totally wrong person. Because what we see really is that you know, there's a magic in life. There's so much that we have no real grasp about, but we sense it. And I remember when that movie came out, and she was singing this incredible song. And then I realized she was singing it to this guy. I think he's who is the guy? Yeah, he's not the right person. I knew she was in trouble, because you have to, you really, honestly, you listen to this. If you're going to sing, and I hope you do, because it's really crucial that we sing, but really sing to the right person or being or whatever. Don't waste your spirit on what Hollywood dreams up for you to do. It's just not good for you. It's really not good for you. I mean, it's terrible for you. And this is what you see in terms of Whitney and her arrow in the heart. Now, how would she get her arrow out of her heart? I'm so glad that the Buddha, you know, just told us right out front, there is suffering. Okay, so we got suffering. And then there are ways to deal with suffering. So she needed support. She needed spiritual friends. She needed somebody telling her the truth. Well, she had someone, the woman that she had loved for apparently most of her life, and they managed to separate them because of some really deluded notion about, you know, how your image is supposed to, you know, be something somebody else manufactures. I mean, now how crazy is that? You know, your image should be you. However you are, that's you. So coming along and thinking about her now as an ancestor, you know, I think what we need to do, and this is true with Michael, I call Michael Saint Michael, and this is true of Prince. You know, I think they would want us to use their inability to maintain integrity. They want us to use that to help us grow in a good way. So we want, you know, Whitney to know that, you know, drugs will not do it. You know, living with Bobby Brown is not good. That reality show is a terrible blow to every conscious human on the planet, and really bad for her. You cannot really live a good life having deliberately trashed yourself. You cannot. I mean, you now, in the Tibetan tradition, they have Milarepa, you know, who killed all those people in the village and realized it was awful. His mother made him do it, but it was an awful thing to do. So he meditated so long, he was so sorry that he meditated so long that things started growing out of his body until he, you know, he got it, that he had to prepare, and he had to pray, and he had to work for others. He had to be different. And that is what, you know, these ancestors show us. So as with Whitney, then there's Prince. Well, first Michael, I think. You know, what a blow to the heart. You know, and I really feel like it had to be a blow to almost any heart, not just, you know, a heart of color. I mean, a heart is a heart. And to see this beautiful young man mutilate himself, you know, and try to be something that he totally wasn't. No wonder he died. No, and Prince too, you know, just trying to be something he wasn't, and wearing those high-heel shoes and trying to jump all over the stage and those things, and really wrecking his hips. You know the story, any of this? But anyway, they're not the only people who are doing this, so just, you know. So these now are our ancestors, and they have this role. They have this role of teaching us about suffering. We now see that they suffered. They would come out, they look so great, you know, kind of great. I don't know about, sometimes they didn't look that great, but anyway. Michael especially, no matter how he was looking, he had the moves, you know, so that was fine. But basically they were self-destructing. They were self-destructing, and we were confused. We were confused, and we were deliberately confused, you know. And so we have this responsibility as the people who give energy to the people, you know, who entertain us, but basically they're trying to lift our sagging spirits often. We have a responsibility to keep them more honest about coming from an honest place rather than a fake place. And to do that, we have to steadily encourage things like meditation, contemplation, spiritual friendship, asanga, so that there is a place where they can be recharged, they can be refilled, and they can, you know, have a better sense of what is good for the whole, you know, as in the whole planet, not just the whole industry, as they call it, you know. I mean, can you imagine music being an industry? But anyway. Let me just read this poem about Michael, because, you know, the thing about some of our ancestor gift givers, like Michael, is that their image has been fashioned in such a way that you're not even supposed to know they're intelligent. You know, I mean, you don't think of Michael. I never thought of Michael. When I met Michael, actually, what struck me was that he didn't say a word. He was like he was mute. But what I learned later was that he was extremely intelligent and really vocal and thoughtful. And so this is a poem kind of about that. Michael Jackson gives a talk. At the oddest time, sometimes in the middle of the night, I hear Michael Jackson's voice, the one you only hear on YouTube. They don't care about us, he's saying. And then he repeats it, they don't care about us. He delivers a lecture. Who knew he even understood? Talking about the old music men who sang and played their weary hearts out and died penniless, while the record companies made zillions of dollars. Oh, Michael, we cannot forget how you disappeared from us behind a fake face that someone sketched for you while you were in another world, a world of dream and fear and doubt, nowhere near as beautiful as the face with which you were born. We are in shock. Did anyone get close enough to tell you that? That all up and down the disappearing world we mourned. Africa sent up a huge cry of desolation. Women and young men on every continent were frightened of the message to erase. Children, those little ones you loved so much, huddled together in dread, disoriented for life by your betrayal. What must they be? What could they become, if not themselves? That was the moment you died for many of us, youngsters and oldsters alike. We loved you so much, Michael, and we thought we understood the demons chasing you. We had outrun, or not, so many close demons of our own. You were murdered by envy, Michael. Even as the clown they made you look, you were loved for grace and kindness, and a nimbleness that verged on magic that was enchantment that was magic. I want the coming Michael Jackson. Michael Jacksons are always coming. We are collectively made of Michael Jacksons. I want the coming Michael Jackson to stay home in whatever community he is born. I want the rest of us surrounding him from birth with love and delight to be the ones who care about us. And then this, you know, now is like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Human Flow yet by Ai Weiwei, the Chinese great force. But try to see it, because now there are 65 million homeless people just loose on the planet, just nowhere, you know, their homes have been destroyed, they have nowhere to be, they're fenced out of countries, they're living in squalor and devastation, and it's just, anyway, so this is called Wherever You Are Grieving. Wherever you are grieving, whether Paris, Damascus, Jerusalem, Bamako, Mexico, or Beirut, or New York City, my heart too is bruised and dragging. There used to be such a thing as melodrama, when feelings could be made up. But now there is bare pain and sorrow, a sense of endlessly missed opportunities, a sense of endlessly missed opportunities to smile and embrace, quote, the other before the change. We mourn the loss of goodness that was so divinely ordinary. So divinely ordinary. This was before people shot people to death in churches, you know, right down the road in the middle of nowhere. We mourn the loss of goodness that was so divinely ordinary. Babyhood, youth, the blessings of maturity and of old age, all sacrificed now almost predictably to the same greed our histories, every one of them, could have warned us against if only we knew them. Because there it is, you know, there it is, that if you don't know the history of where you are, and you don't know the history of some of these disasters happening, it's really hard to know what is going on at all. So you have to really deeply study, and this is my hope. And it's not even a hope that is founded on very much, because I notice that people don't really like to study. I mean, I know this is a university and that's what you do all the time, but in the general world, and especially in our country, study seems to be very far down the line of what people feel they need to be doing in order to live a life that is aware. I mean, just to be aware, just not to be ignorant. I mean, I've always felt that, you know, we used to have a song about it, I think, in the South when I was growing up. It's something about, you know, it's basically all right to die, because we're all gonna do that. But just don't die just completely ignorant about what it is that caused it, you know, or just where you are and who you are dealing with. There is a part of, you know, enlightenment in that, you know, just having a sense of why this is like this. You know, I mean, in the South, parents of color often wouldn't tell us because they didn't want to hurt us. And so the behavior of the extremely challenged, you know, opposition just seemed mad. I mean, it was mad, but it just seemed, you know, it didn't have a context. You know, I was explaining to my daughter something she couldn't believe. My daughter went to Yale, and she thinks, you know, that everybody, well, she thought until I told her, that everybody knew certain things. And I said to her, I said, well, guess what? Your grandparents did not know where black people came from. She said, they didn't? I said, no, they had no idea. Nobody told them. How would they know? I mean, they thought they came from Africa, but how were they to know? These are the kinds of things that seem so incredible that we rarely even consider what that means to the whole structure of the society. That people are left with so much ignorance, you know, deliberately inflicted, because when my parents built a school, it was burned to the ground. It wasn't as if they weren't trying. But this kind of, you know, not knowing, not wanting to know, not digging, is a part of American life that puts us in such danger. You know, it's part of the reason we are where we are now, where we hardly have a country. You know? I mean, it has reverted to being a colony of England, basically, or whoever. And not even England. So anyway, I want to read you this poem I wrote for Martin. Now, I met Martin Luther King when I was a student. And this is actually a story in itself about, you know, you have no idea what it was like to lose him, really. But this was when I was a teenager, and I was a freshman in college, and he'd been to Morehouse, which was right across the street from my school, and my speech teacher said to our class, go and write about Martin Luther King Jr., but we don't want to hear what he's saying, we just want to know how he says it. Now think about that. I mean, this is the kind of way that people try to keep you from thinking. So I went over and met him, and he was, of course, brilliant. I mean, he was just, as you could imagine, he was very young, too, and he was... So I couldn't write about what he was saying, which was, yeah, we got to desegregate Atlanta. And then we got to desegregate all of the South. And don't y'all go anywhere, just stay right here. And I just loved his accent because it was so much the Southern preacher. And I wrote mostly about what a neat suit he wore. He wore this incredible, I won't even go into it, but you know, he was always so well dressed. It was so remarkable that he was like that. And then when he led marches with, in solidarity with the sharecroppers, he of course dressed like a sharecropper. So he had that wonderful sense of, you know, solidarity, which I think the younger people in SNCC, this was a student organization, helped him with. But in any case, this is a poem about Martin, and it's called The New Dark Ages, which is where I think we are. As we slip into the new dark ages, you become more dear to me. Your face, your smile, that carefully trimmed, never to turn gray hair. We may not emerge from this darkness in my lifetime. And yet, I think of you so often smiling or laughing outright, your sturdy frame gallant and ready for the fight. Though it is true you left home like the Buddha to find a way for all of us, leaving your wife and children to suffer a most peculiar loneliness, and yes, the children, some of them, would be lost. Still, we miss you. Arrow in the heart, dreadfully. As we miss so many others who left us with this one desire, that no matter how deep the fall into obscurity and obscenity this new age portends, life might permit us to remain standing, if only on the inside, smiling and laughing with you among the solemn army who went out into the darkness all those years ago, always singing, to examine the path and be the light. So, so I want to leave you with the thought of remembering that when the arrow is in the heart, and the arrow is there, you know, so much. I mean, think of Aung San Suu Kyi. Now, here's a meditator her whole life. House arrest, you know, all that horrible history. Now she's, quote, free, and yet her people are murdering other people, and she apparently cannot say anything. I mean, this is one of those binds that just, I think of her, I think of the arrow there. And how do you get it out? Well, you know, just accepting partly, you know, the basic thing that, as the Buddha said, there is suffering. You're going to have it. It's going to happen. But also that there are aids to help you. One is just giving up any sense of time connected to your suffering. It will be there as long as it is there. There is, in my experience, there is no moving it along. Can't really drink yourself through it. You can't, you know, smoke yourself through it. It's going to be right there. And the meditation is, I think, the best medicine, but also, as I said earlier, a spiritual community that is safe, that is active, that gives you a place to be where you don't have to have any kind of defenses. You can just be open as who you are. And then the circle. For the society and the world to move in a good way now, I think it is essential that we form circles with each other and work on all the issues that come to us. They won't be the same for everybody, but they will be something that is deeply, deeply troubling, deeply rooted in what we need to do. And so I was a member of a group for 10 years. And basically it's so simple. What you do is you just call up. We called up 11 friends, and we called it Women's Council, because we honestly have to have Women's Council more than ever. And they came, and we met every month, dropping whatever we were doing, wherever we were in the world, and we would go to Women's Council. And we never had an agenda. I mean, this is one of the magical things about having a circle. You just have the circle, you get there, bring some food, because we do like to have something to nosh on, you know. So that is my prescription for getting the arrow out. The other part is nature. I wrote a piece about how when Africans were captured and forced to come here to this country, they had left their gods in Africa, and they had forced them literally to accept, you know, the God of this land. But neither God, some of the gods they were leaving were pretty rough. I would not have been happy with them, but to be forced to accept this new God was terrifying and wasn't good for their spirits. So that place, you see, that place that opens, that is the suffering place. That is where you meet your ancestor in the moment of them leaving Africa and getting on that boat. But what I learned was that if I, in my earlier incarnation, had been on that boat, my God, that would always be there in some form, and I could turn to help me get the arrow out, was nature. And so they would have had the water, they would have had the stars, they would have had the clouds, they would have had the rain, and they would have had the earth when they got here, and that would have been the spirit, connection for them that was really real, as opposed to the foreign implantation of a God that was encouraging them to be good servants. So I thank you very much for being so attentive, and I have had a wonderful time talking to you. And now we shall have what I love to do more than almost anything, and I deeply believe in. I think that all suffering, most of it anyway, can be relieved by dancing. So let's dance.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.